Alright, welcome back to part 2 of this playthrough of Scenario 2. We left off last episode right before resolving our first air combat of this scenario. And before we jump in though, one of the viewers made a comment about rear view ability, and it was answered in the comments, but I just kind of want to explain it, and I should have explained it during the previous episode. And it was when I was trying to do a tally with the Japanese fighters to the P-40s that were coming in underneath and behind. I applied a -2 modifier to the tally roll because of this right here. Target is behind the squadron, but I didn't really address this, and I should have. If squadron has rear view ability, this does not apply against targets at higher altitude. Well, as it says right there, at higher altitude, since the P-40Es are at a lower altitude, or were at a lower altitude, or even if they were at the same altitude as the Ki-43s, that rear view ability does not help them. I should explain that, or just made mention of that, but I did answer the comment in the question in the comments, but should have made mention of that. Okay, let's go ahead and resolve this combat then. So just to kind of recap, we had the P-40 coming in, and it climbed up into this space, and its movement triggered A, the Japanese Squadron A, which was flying right here. It had 4 movement points. It turned 180 degrees for 1 movement point, 2 movement points, 3 movement points, and then rotated down and dove in for its 4th movement point. So now we have advanced to the combat phase. We're going to go ahead and we're going to resolve this combat. Alright, so the attacker in this case is going to be the Japanese, since the P-40s didn't even have a tally on the Japanese before the combat. And you can see their vector marker is still placed. They don't have a tally. So A is the attacker, and they get to choose what combat rating they're going to use. So let's first verify what altitude we're at. We're at altitude 12. So if we look at the Ki-43, we're going to be dealing with this band of performance ratings. So they're going to choose either speed or turn. Well, obviously they're going to choose turn because that's their speed is quite bad at this altitude. So they're going to choose a turn rating of 5, which means the P-40s have to match it. They have to use their turn rating as well. We're at an altitude of 12, so we are using the top row for the P-40s as well, and their turn rating is a 4. So they attack at a 5, they attack at a 4. So some modifiers real quick. The Ki-43, their speed, their turn rating of 5 gets modified up to a 6 because they're veteran. They are marked with a veteran marker down there. But they are, I should say, they are squadrons, so no other modifiers. They're a 6. The P-40s are a speed of 4. I'm sorry, turn of 4. They are not veteran. They are climbing, but climbing only affects your speed rating, so -1 to speed. So doesn't affect their turn rating. So their speed of 4, -1 because they're a flight. So those are our modifiers to determine combat ratings. So we're looking at a 6 for the Japanese, a 3 for the P-40. So that's +3 in favor of the Japanese. -3 is the column that the Americans will roll on. So +3 for the Japanese, -3 for the Americans. So let's go ahead and we'll roll for the, doesn't matter which, we'll go ahead and roll for the Japanese first. And they score quite high with a 9. So we look at a 9 on the +3 column, and that is 2 hits. So we're going to resolve 2 hits, and we'll go ahead and confirm those right now. So we're going to roll 1 dice for each hit, and we're going to add the firepower, which is 0, and compare that to the protection rating of the P40. So here we go. Let's see how they did. All right, 5. That is good. That is above the protection rating of the P40, so that's 1 kill. Let's go ahead and resolve the other hit. And that is a 3, which is below the protection rating, so no effect. So one of the hits did no serious damage. The other did cause a loss. So I forgot to get out my markers real quick. Let me go ahead and do that. One loss to the P40Es. Let's go ahead and we'll mark that right here. And now we'll roll for the Americans. They're rolling on the -3 column. Let's see how they do. Oh, that's not bad. An 8 on the -3, unfortunately, is no hits. There were no modifiers to this attack. There was no head-on, bouncing, or any of those to either side, so it's just a straight up roll. Okay, so we've got the combat rolls resolved. Now we need to check for cohesion. So let's go ahead, we're going to check the cohesion. We'll do the Japanese first. They roll 2d6, see if they have any disruption. Okay, they roll a 7, and they, look down here on the cohesion table, they have no losses, but they are veterans. They get +1 for that, so they're up to an 8. They're on the attacking side in this combat. They were the attacker, so they get +1 to that, so it's up to a 9. But they have no radio, so it's a -1, so they're back down to 8. And that's all that is. So 8, no disruption. However, they do get marked with a low ammo marker. Now I'll go ahead and we'll roll the cohesion for the Americans. Alright, so 7. And if we look at the cohesion table, they're going to get -1 because they have a loss marker. So that goes down to a 6. And none of these other ones apply. So a 6 for the fighter is 1 level of disruption. But since they are a flight, they are not a squadron. They're just a flight. A single level of disruption will break them. So these P40s break. They lose their mission marker. They now must head home. And again, I could go ahead and mark them with a -1 ammo marker for the end of the combat, but again, it's not necessary because they're already broken, and these markers only affect cohesion. So I'll put it on there just to be thorough, but they are broken. We'll go ahead and we'll remove their vector because they're broken. They don't place a tally, they're broken. And that is the conclusion of that combat. We don't check for a dogfight because a dogfight only occurs at the conclusion of dogfight. Or I'm sorry, it can only occur if there are unbroken fighters remaining on both sides. But one side is broken, so there is not the possibility of a dogfight. Alright, that concludes our combat. We'll just step over here now to the administration phase. And the only real potential thing we could do here is we could have these guys attempt to change their vectors. And so, just for fun, let's go ahead and try to change those. We'll roll for A first. Their GCI rating is a 4, so you need to roll higher than a 4. So let's roll for A first. And they succeeded, so A can change his vector. Let's just move it a little closer, like that. And then we'll roll for B, see if he can change his vector. And he rolls a 5, which is above the GCI rating of 4, so he also can change his vector. We'll move it a little closer. Now, anytime a vector moves or is placed, the opposing player can roll to attempt a height error. So we'll go ahead and do that just for fun. They can roll 1 dice for each of the vectors. If they roll a 6 for either of them, they can move that vector. So let's roll for A. And let's roll for B. Okay, no height error. All right, so let's go ahead and update the turn track. We're now on turn 4. And we start with the tally phase. So, Raiders tally first. Let's go ahead. We'll have Flight D attempt to tally B coming out of the clouds here. So it's a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They need to roll higher than a 6, and they can't because they don't have any good modifiers. So that's a pointless roll. We won't even do that. And then this guy's going to, A has a tally on the broken flight. He's going to keep that for now because that tally marker will let A have freedom of movement. And we'll try to have him scoot over here as fast as he can to try to get in position to interrupt these interceptors. So let's go ahead now. We'll have no other Raider tallies. See if these guys can tally anything. B is green. He's going to get a -1 to his tally roll, so that's not going to work. And this guy is in the clouds, -1 to his tally roll. And just so you know how clouds work, if your line of sight passes through, touches, goes into a square with a cloud marker, then that cloud marker affects. And if you're also in it or tracing line of sight into a cloud square, that cloud will also affect. So he's in the wispy clouds, and he's going to get a -1 to his tally roll. Now, they're not cumulative, so if his line of sight goes through several of these, you just take the worst modifier. And since these are all wispy clouds, -1 is the worst you can get. If there was, like, say, a broken cloud here and the line of sight traced from the wispy into the broken to your target square, then you would take the largest one. Say the broken would be a -2. Okay, so we're just not going to have any tally rolls here. Nothing really can succeed. Actually, A gets +1 for being a veteran and +1 for being on the same radio net with GCI. So they get a +2 and then -1 for the wispy clouds. So actually, he could tally, potentially he could tally that lead bomber. So we'll go ahead and have A try to tally that lead bomber. Nope, that's not going to do it. Okay, on to the movement phase. So escorts move first. We don't have any. Actually, dogfights would move first. We don't have any of those. We don't have any escorts, so bombers move first. We'll have this guy move 1, 2. 1, 2. Next to move are unalerted fighters. So D is still unalerted down here. Oops, I accidentally flipped that over. So they're unalerted still. They do not get alerted by their comrades' tally over here because they're not on a radio net. So he's on a sweep mission. He flies 1, 2. Okay, now we move in alerted fighters in initiative order, or from lowest to highest here. So A is going to move first. They got their 3 movement points. They're going to fly 1, 2 up to altitude 10. And then they're going to spend, they're just going to actually not even move closer to their vector. They move closer, they climb their elevation, so they can spend their 3rd movement point just circling here. And we'll do that. B, now they are at altitude 10, so for them it's going to cost 3 movement points to climb. So he has to move here to decrease the distance to his vector and climb 1 elevation. So that's their movement. And then over here, A still has a tally on P, so he will not move until P moves. So let's go ahead and have P move first. Gets 3 movement points, and he has to use them all to try to exit the left map, because that's the scenario specifies the left side as the Chinese side of the map. So they're going to rotate down and dive 1, 2, 3 into the clouds, and then they're going to rotate and spend their 4th movement point, stay in the cloud cover. And they're still tallied, and they dove. Now that triggers Japanese A's movement. So he is going to rotate. He's going to rotate down and go 1, and then go 2, 3, 4. And he could have dove down there and attacked them again, but he's not really interested in risking cohesion rolls to affect these guys anymore. Since they're out of the fight, he now has a priority of getting after these guys. So that's the movement phase. Combat phase, no combat. Administration phase, don't really have anything to do here. Actually, we do. Let's say the Chinese player does not like the Japanese player using this tally marker as a cause for free movement. So P would like to escape, get off the map. The Japanese player, if both sides are in agreement that the broken flights or squadrons are no longer important to play, they can just be removed. But if one side agrees to the escape, to remove it, and the other side says, no, actually I want to keep it on the map, then both sides are going to, or I'm sorry, the Japanese player in this case would have to roll dice to see if they can keep or force that flight to stay on the map. So these are the escape rules near the end of the basic rules in the game. So P would like to escape, just be removed from the map, which would take away A's tally and freedom of movement. But A wants him to stay, so he has to roll a dice equal to or greater than the distance. So the distance is 1, 2, 3, and then this guy's in clouds with a value of 1, the wispy clouds. So he needs to roll a 4 or higher to keep him on the map. So let's roll 1 dice. And he rolled a 5. So he did roll equal to or greater than the distance, so he forces P to stay on the map. Good for the Japanese, bad for the Chinese. Okay, so that's the administration phase. We're now on to a new turn, so turn 5. And let's go ahead and do the tally phase. So Raider tallies first. We're going to have this flight up here try to tally the green flight. So here he goes. He rolls a 3. No modifiers for him. 1, 2, 3. He needed higher than a 3, so he failed the tally roll. A could make a tally roll, but he's still kind of far away, so he's going to not tally this turn. He's going to keep that tally marker on P, still getting free movement for doing so. So let's go over here. We'll have A attempt to tally this lead bomber right here. So let's go ahead and roll for A. He rolls a 5. He gets +1 for being veteran, +1 for GCI on the radio net. So that's an easy tally for him. So A will go ahead and flip this over to the tally side and place it on W. This guy, he's going to try to tally this rear bomber. And I probably should have done this in the reverse order. Give this guy the closer target because he's got the worst modifier, because he's green. But, yeah, to make this thing interesting, I'm just going to go ahead and cheat. I'm going to make A tally this guy back here. It's not cheating if both sides agree. And since I'm playing this solo and I agree, then we're good. So we'll say A tallied the rear bomber, giving this guy the closer target. Better chances of succeeding. Actually, no, we don't want to do that because we want this guy to attack this turn, and if he tallies this guy, he's not going to be able to attack this turn. They're still too far away. This guy's going to fly here, and this guy has to spend 3 to climb. So he wants to get at that W this turn. So we'll do what I originally said. All right, B is still going to try to tally that rear bomber, though, so let's go ahead and try that. He needs to roll high. That's not good enough. +1 for GCI is a 3. -1 because he's green. That's a failed tally roll. Okay, so that's all the tally rolls. Let's go ahead and do the movement phase. So bombers move first. So we'll have this guy go 1, 2. That triggers A's movement. He's right here. He has 3 movement points. It costs 3 movement points to climb. That's what he's going to do. He's going to climb right up into W. Right up there. Start getting at these guys, and he's climbing. Okay, then we move X, 1, 2. Then we move unalerted fighters. That's going to be this guy, 1, 2. Then we move alerted fighters in initiative order. It's going to be this guy down here first. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and drop way down here. Still tallied. Still diving. That triggers this guy's movement. He's going to go 1, 2, 3. And move up here. He's not diving, he's not climbing, so this comes off. And there we go. Movement is complete. Let's go ahead to the combat phase. And we do have one combat to resolve here. So let's get our displays up here. We've got the P-40Bs against the Ki-21s. The Americans are the attacker. Just because there's a bomber involved, the bombers are always the defending side. So B gets to choose. They're at altitude 10 here. They're at their altitude limit, because if you remember from the scenario special rules, the P-40s cannot climb above altitude 10. So we're at altitude 10 here, and they can choose speed or turn. Now if they choose speed, that climb marker is going to hurt them. If they choose speed, turn, then those bombers are going to get a nasty defense modifier. So we'll go ahead and have them choose speed. So the American fighters have a speed of 4, -1 because they're climbing, so that goes down to a 3, but +1 because they are veteran, so that goes back up to a 4. Japanese at this altitude have a speed of 3, but they are carrying a bomb load, so -1 to their speed, they're down to a 2. And one other thing to note here is the Americans, or the Chinese, entered from one of the 3 squares that are in the forward, that are in front of the bomber. So these are the 3 squares that are in front of this bomber. So since the Chinese flight squadron is entering from one of those forward squares, this is going to be a head-on attack. Oh, and I forgot about that. Since it is a head-on attack, then he has to use speed. He can't even use turn. It has to be a speed combat anyways. So, all right. So +2 for the Chinese, -2 for the Japanese. Let's go ahead. We'll roll on the combat table. Let's roll for the Americans first on the +2 column. All right. Oh, that's a really good roll. All right. Let's check the modifiers here. Head-on combat. That's a -2 to the combat roll. So that goes down 2, and then no others. Okay, so 11 -2, that's a 9. We look on the +2 column, we get 2 hits. So that's great. Let's go ahead and resolve those hits. Now, what's worth mentioning here is these Ki-21s, their protection rating is 4-5, but they have an H, meaning there's a +1 modifier to loss checks when there's a head-on combat. As you can see right here, firepower modifiers, head-on combat, target protection H. So the Americans will get +1 to their loss checks for their firepower, and then another +1 because this is a head-on attack against these guys. So here we go. First loss check. That's a 4, +1 for firepower, +1 for the head-on is a 6. That's above the protection rating, so that is a loss. Loss on W. And then let's do the other loss check. Another 4, so that's another loss. So very, very good shooting for the Flying Tiger pilots here. Let's go ahead and roll combat for the Japanese. They're rolling on the -2 column. They roll an 8. It's a head-on combat, so -2 for them. So it goes down to a 6. 6 on the -2 is no hits. All right. Now we got to roll cohesion. Let's go ahead and we'll roll the Chinese squadron's cohesion first. They roll a 10, +1 because they're veteran, +1 because they are the attacker, so they easily pass the cohesion check. and we mark them with a -1 ammo marker. And let's roll for the Japanese cohesion. They roll a 9 -2 because they have 2 losses. So that goes down to 7. And they also pass their cohesion check. And bombers, they don't get ammo markers after combat. Alright, so that's combat for this turn. Let's go ahead and we go to the administration phase, and at this point we'll go ahead and remove this guy. Since this guy's going to plan on tallying next turn, he doesn't need this guy anymore. So we'll take him off and move that, set this aside for now. Okay. Here we go with turn 5. No, turn 6. We're on turn 6 now. Alright, so first off, let's go ahead and do tallies. We'll go ahead and have this guy try to tally that B flight. So here we go. That's a 2. That's not going to do it. And then we're going to have A try to tally that veteran A squadron. It's a 5 +1 for being veteran. It's an easy tally. So let's bring this tally marker back on, and we'll place it on these P-40s. Okay. Tally phase for the Chinese now. He's going to keep a tally on that bomber, and we're going to have this flight try to tally that rear bomber. 3 +1 for GCI, -1 because he's green. That's a 3. So that is a successful tally. So we're going to take his vector marker, flip it to the tally side, and put it on the bombers. Alright, time for movement. So we're going to have the bombers move first. And let's go ahead. These bombers are going to go 1, 2. That triggers A's movement because A has a tally on them. So they are going to rotate and go 1, 2, and they're going to charge in here to attack. They didn't climb or dive, so they lose their climb marker. However, they are tallied by A here, so A is now going to move. They're going to go 1, 2, and they're going to dive into the action. Since they dove, they get marked with the dive marker. Alright, now this guy's going to move 1, 2. Okay, now that triggers this guy's movement. Now he's starting his movement in the same hex with his tallied, the same square with his tallied target. So normally this B flight would have to stay here and do combat, but since this is actually a head-on situation, the bomber moved in such a way that it looked like just a head-on combat normally. With B being in one of the 3 forward squares of that bomber. Because it's a head-on condition, B can actually use his next movement point to exit the square and come back in. And he's going to do that. He is going to spend 1 movement point to exit, spend a 2nd movement point to turn 180 degrees, and then his 3rd movement point to fly back in. And he's doing that because he wants to avoid the bad -2 head-on combat modifier. And then this Japanese flight up here, he's still oblivious to what's going on below, so he goes 1, 2. Alright, now we're on to the combat phase. We have 2 combats to resolve here. Alright, we're getting close to the 30-minute marker. Let's go ahead, we'll just resolve these real quick. Maybe we can get by with it. Alright. Let's go ahead and resolve this first combat over here. Now we've got, this is a good example of a multi-squadron or multi-unit combat. The Japanese have both a bomber and a fighter in this combat, and it's just a single combat, even though A has a tally on Chinese A has Chinese A has a tally on the Japanese W. It's all just one combat because they're all connected by a tally. So the Japanese player, because they have 2 squadrons, they have to choose a primary combatant. Which ratings are we going to use? Are we going to use the bombers ratings or the Ki-43? And obviously the Ki-43 is much better, so we're going to use them. So the P-40, they are the attacker because there's a bomber involved, so they by default get to be the attacker. If that was not a bomber, so say these were 3 fighters, 2 Japanese and a Chinese fighter, because the Japanese were the last ones to move in or had the last moving piece in that combat, they would be the attacker. But because there's a bomber, the Chinese get to be the attacker. So they get to choose speed or turn. And they're going to choose speed because the Ki-43s at this altitude have a pretty poor speed and their turn is excellent. So they're going to choose a speed of 4. So their speed is 4 for the attackers, plus 1 because they are veteran, so they're a 5. And then the Ki-43, so their speed is a 3. And now, just to be clear here, we could make the Ki-21 the attacker, but he is carrying a bomb load, so that is not going to help him at all. So we're going to make this guy the primary combatant. His speed is a 3, plus 1 because he's veteran, so that's a 4. And he gets no other modifiers here, so it's 5 versus 4. Now, if you notice on the combat table, each additional fighter squadron gives the side a plus 1 to their speed or turn. Had I chosen the bomber as the primary combatant, the Japanese fighter would have just contributed plus 1 to the combat. So they would have gotten a speed of 3, minus 1 for bombs is 2, plus 1 for the supporting fighter is 3. So going with the veteran fighters as your primary combatant, sure, you lose the plus 1 for additional fighter squadrons, but they got the veteran marker, which sent them up to a 4, and no bomb load. So it's 5 versus 4. The Chinese will roll on the plus 1, Japanese on the minus 1. So here goes the American roll on the plus 1 column. And that's a 7. There's no modifiers, so a 7 on a plus 1 is just 1 hit. Now, because there are 2 squadrons to choose from as the targets for this hit, the Chinese player will need to decide if they are going to apply the hit to the Ki-43 squadron or the Ki-21 squadron, and they want these guys. So we're going to go ahead and have the P-40s target the bombers with their loss check. So here goes the loss check. That's a 4, plus 1 for the firepower of 1, so it's a 5. And the protection rating on the bomber is 4-5, so it matched the protection rating, so that's just a straggler result. I'll go ahead and we'll put a straggler on W. Turn that around. And let's go ahead and do the Japanese combat roll on the minus 1 column. And that is a 9. That is a 9, and there are no modifiers for them. So a 9 on the minus 1 column is a hit. So 1 hit against the P-40s, and we're using the firepower of 0 of the Ki-43, so it's just a straight up roll. It's a 4. It matches the protection rating of the P-40B, so that's a straggler. Alright, so there's a straggler for A. Now we do cohesion rolls. So all of those participants have to do a cohesion roll. So let's do the Japanese squadron, bomber squadron first. Roll their cohesion. Ooh, that's what we wanted to see. So that's a 3, minus 2 because they have 2 losses, so that goes down to a 1 basically. But if you look at the cohesion table, let me get that. The bombers used this column If it's a 3 or less, it's only 1 level of disruption. A squadron cannot be receiving 2 levels of disruption in a single cohesion roll. So they are disrupted only. If they were fighters, that would have been a broken result. But they are bombers. They are harder to break. So they are disrupted only. And let's go ahead and roll for the Japanese fighters, their cohesion. Ooh, that is not good for them. That is 3 plus 1 because they're veteran, minus 1 because of their low ammo marker that they've got. So that's a 3. And a 3 for a fighter squadron is 2 levels of disruption. So they not only disrupt, they break. So A is broken. They lose their mission marker. And they lose their tally. And let's go ahead now and roll for the cohesion of the Chinese squadron. That is a 6 plus 1 because they are veteran, plus 1 because they're the attacker, and minus 1 because they are at low ammo. So that's a 6 plus 2 is 8, and then minus 1 is 7. So they barely pass that cohesion check. They do go to low ammo. Nope, wrong one. They are not at low ammo. Oh, you know what? I'm so confused. Oh, here we go. We're up here. We're up here. So they're now at minus 2 ammo, right there. Okay. Now we don't check for dogfight because the Japanese side does not have any unbroken fighters. So that stays as it is. Alright, we're at 37 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the episode here. We will continue this next time. Looks like we're still have a few more combats to go, as A is still unbroken. These guys haven't gotten into the fight yet, and who knows how this green flight's going to perform. We'll pick up next time. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, let me know in the comments section. I'll try to address them in the next episode, but thanks for watching.